NFL Week 12 is upon us, John McKechnie, and we are here to break everything down from a gambling perspective as we do each week. Big slate, John, spread across multiple days, a unique week, of course, with Thanksgiving. We got 3 games coming at us tomorrow. On Thursday, we get the first ever, the inaugural NFL Black Friday game between the Dolphins and the Tim Boyle-led New York Jets. And with no teams on bye, still a nice sized Sunday slate, right? Sometimes when you have these weird slates, you feel like you get a little shortchanged, but we got a nice, robust early window. We still got 4 games in the late window on Sunday. And then, of course, the usual Sunday and Monday night football as well. Looking forward to diving in on all this with you, man. How are you?
I'm doing great. I love Thanksgiving. I love the full slate of action on Thursday. It carries you throughout the day. And then, it's cool to have the Black Friday game, and Sunday's going to be awesome too. And you know what? Even Vikings Bears to cap off the weekend on Monday night. Not bad. Pretty watchable, if nothing else.
Yeah, I'm enjoying watching this Vikings team. Even the Bears have become a little bit more frisky over the last couple of weeks. Getting Justin Fields back last week certainly helps there. Excited to see your Ravens in action on Sunday night. But let's dive in on the Thursday slate, John. We'll try to spend a couple minutes on each game and rifle through this at a good pace. Packers-Lions. Lions, 7.5-point favorites at home. Our total up at 47. Am I wrong to be all over Detroit here? I think this is it's the rare bounce back after a win spot for the Detroit Lions, who I thought played a pretty terrible game. Just were handing turnovers to the Chicago Bears early on and then storm back late. And it feels like the Bears blow like 5 games a year like this, where they actually play pretty well. You're feeling pretty good. There's 4 minutes and 15 seconds left. How could they lose a 2-score lead? Well, they did. Good on the Detroit Lions, though, to come back and win that game. I was telling you earlier, that's the type of game that, the classic Detroit Lions lose every single time. And I think for them to find a way to battle back, not get the cover, which would hurt us in the circuit contest, but win that game outright, you survive an ugly outing. And I don't think they're playing that bad again. Not at home, not on Thanksgiving, and not against an extremely banged up Packers team.
Right. The Packers injuries is what kind of steers me towards the Lions being able to get the cover here. At 7.5, it's tricky. The Lions beat them pretty good earlier this season in Lambeau Field. And, this really comes down to Jordan Love, right? Because Aaron Jones, we don't think he's going to play. A.J. Dillon's been on the injury report. Emmanuel Wilson went on IR earlier. So some Patrick Taylor action potentially. So basically, it's going to be Jordan Love and a ragtag group of receivers that is also banged up as well. Musgrave is on IR, I believe you said, and Dontavian Wicks got hurt. So, oh boy, it's a lot to ask of Jordan Love. So I think all 3 favorites, not to spoil it too much, I think all 3 favorites cover on Thursday, but I'm the least confident in the Lions. But I do think that the Packers are just a little bit too shorthanded on a short week to stay in this.
I would rank it Niners, Lions, Cowboys, I think, in terms of confidence. And it's really just about the number with Dallas and the fact that Washington, this would just be a very Washington thing to do, to show up in this spot after hitting rock bottom last week. That's just kind of who the Commanders are. It says a lot that we're mentioning Dontavian Wicks as a key injury for the Packers, but it really is. I mean, he's been a playmaker for them. He's been, arguably more effective than Christian Watson on balance this season. And, the running back room is banged up. The receivers are banged up. The tight ends are banged up. And I think Jordan Love is going to have a tough time repeating, what we saw last week against this Lions defense. So I lead Lions. I don't know if we'll use it on the circuit card, but that would be my play for Packers Lions. Let's talk Commanders-Cowboys. The number's up to 12.5, John. It continues to swell in favor of Dallas. We know what the Cowboys do in these games, right? Bad opponent at home. All they've done this season is just completely annihilate those teams. I mean, they're winning at home by an average of 22.5 points per game. 160 to 50 has been the total score in Dallas Cowboys home games. They basically only played mediocre to bad teams in those spots, but I don't see how we think of Washington as anything other than that.
Right. So the line has climbed a little bit. This was 9 on the look ahead. It was 11 earlier this week. It's locked at 12 at Circa. It's 12.5 at DraftKings, but it's still under 13. So that's enough for me to feel good about the Cowboys in this spot. We know that they're a team that doesn't play with its food. Like when they have a bad team outside of that Cardinals game, they are probably going to win in a very convincing fashion. I think uniquely this is a bad matchup for Washington, given that their woes against good pass rushes. Dallas definitely has one of those. So I think we could see Sam Howell just kind of on his back for most of the afternoon. That's going to be tough. I know there's been some consternation about CeeDee Lamb being a little bit dinged up with the ankle, but I still think that the Cowboys have enough offensive firepower to get this done. And I think, frankly, they might get a little bit of help on the scoring part from their defense here. So I like the Cowboys here. And if I'm looking at player props for this one, take a look-see at one Jake Ferguson. You know who leads the league in red zone targets?
Is it Jake Ferguson?
It's Jake Ferguson. Well, he's tied with Devontae Adams, but they are number one. They're splitting the gold medal on that through 11 weeks, and he's obviously, as a result, number one among tight ends. He's got 4 touchdowns so far this season. I like Ferguson as the first touchdown scorer because if we're looking at this game, who do you think is going to score first? Probably the Cowboys. And
I think so.
Pollard has had his issues getting into the end zone. We all know that. Washington has not given up much in the way of rushing scores this year, so I think it's going to come through the air. I think with Lamb being a little bit dinged up, plus 750 for Ferguson to score that first touchdown. Love that. I like Ferguson as the anytime, of course, as well. And first touchdown, a little bit dicey, but hey, it's Thanksgiving. Let's have a little fun with it. Don't sink everything into that. But first touchdown for Ferguson, I'm into that.
I say sink everything in. Just do it. Why not? The only thing is like Luke Schoonmaker has been, kind of forcing his way into this conversation a little bit. He had a touchdown last week, and like I've been hammering the more on the Jake Ferguson anytime touchdown over on Prize Picks because I'm here in Wisconsin and that's what I have to do. And I always think they look the same to me, right? And like when Schoonmaker had that touchdown, I'm like, all right, let's go, baby, Jake Ferguson. And then he gets up and it's like, wait, that's a Schoonmaker. That doesn't say Ferguson. But no, I think that's a great call by you, no question on that. So we like both of the favorites in those early Thanksgiving games. And I can tell you, John, it might be square. I like the favorite in Niners Seahawks as well. 49ers up to 7.5-point favorites at DraftKings. You'll still see some 7s out there. There's actually an 8. They're 8-point favorites at PointsBet, still at 7 at FanDuel. I think this is a just really, really good spot for San Francisco. Other than having to go to Seattle for this one, you're catching Geno Smith banged up. You're catching Kenneth Walker banged up. He's not going to play. DK Metcalf is on the injury report. He's had every injury in the book so far this season. There's some reason to believe that Zach Charbonnet can give this Seattle running game a jolt, but I don't think that's what it's going to take. Like, this is not a game where Seattle has to run the ball. It's like you got to keep up with the 49ers, and that's asking a lot of a bruised tricep Geno Smith and a Seattle team that even in games that they win, they cannot convert third downs. They move the ball, and it's 3rd and 4, and they just can't keep going. I think they've been lucky in a lot of ways to be sitting where they are. To win that Browns game a few weeks ago. Who did they play 2 weeks ago? I'm totally blanking. There was another game that they won. They won at the buzzer on a kick.
Washington.
Yeah, they were lucky to win both of those games. I think that luck came back around last week. Missing the 55-yarder against the Rams, a game that they really gave away after a strong start. Just not the team you want to face right now if you're Seattle. And this kicks off a brutal portion of their schedule.
Exactly. So I think the Niners are back to who they were through the first month or so of the season. Purdy needs to keep playing well. That's been a key for them. A lot of turnovers during their losing streak, 6 touchdowns, no interceptions since the bye over those last 2 games. They're healthy. Deebo Samuel's back. Trent Williams is back. Brandon Ayuk is playing extremely well. Kittle. As far as props are concerned for this one, I like McCaffrey to score 2 or more touchdowns. In this one, you can get that at about 5-1 at most shops. So interested there. I think the Niners paced them. It concerns me almost a little bit that the line's not higher, but even still, I mean, this was 4.5, I think, going into last weekend, and it's up to 7 now. I think I'd be comfortable taking an alternate number, like up to 9.5 on the Niners to get me to plus 103. So I really am in on the 49ers here. I think that they make a statement. I don't think we get a particularly interesting game on Thursday night, but hey, it's football. If it's bad, we can just watch the Egg Bowl, right? But I think the Niners go in and really take it to them.
Yeah, San Francisco 10-1 against the spread in their last 11 divisional games. Let's move on to Black Friday. Dolphins-Jets. Dolphins 10-point favorites at the New York Jets. You'll see some 9.5s out there as well. Would recommend grabbing that. I like Miami here. It's hard to like the Jets in any spot right now. I don't think going to Tim Boyle is going to change anything. I think that was a change for the sake of change. And I don't fault the Jets for doing that because you got to get a look. You got to try anything at this point. And it's just clear that Zach Wilson was not going to turn that corner. But I don't think that really moves the calculus for me. The question is, can the Jets defense show up here and, kind of do something similar to what we saw the Raiders do to the Dolphins a week ago?
Right. So that's tricky. And that, the Dolphins will be on the road in this particular setup. So it's tricky to cover 9 points against a defense that good. But when the offense is as inept as the Jets are, where like I feel like personally their team total might be like 13 points or something, I think the Dolphins will be able to get into the mid 20s and therefore get the cover. I'm not as strong on it as I was on the Cowboys or the Niners, but I think that the chalk reigns supreme again. The public all over the Dolphins, understandably so. 81% of the money is coming in on the Dolphins, but I roll with the public in this particular instance. I think the Jets offense is just in that bad of tatters to where it's like they were able to keep things together through the first 10 or so, 9 weeks of the season and have a respectable record, but losing the last couple of games and having to make this change to Tim Boyle, who probably even worse than Zach Wilson, if that's possible. That does not bode well for them. So give me the Fins.
Yeah, hard to find a reason to back the Jets here. I think this is a defense that, some of the games they won early on, even going back to week 1 against Buffalo, you kind of felt like the defense had this aura of like, all right, you know what, we could put this team on our back. Like we could get to 8 or 9 wins just because our defense is so strong. And like these last couple of weeks, I've gotten the feeling that this defense has kind of realized it's just not going to happen, right? And we saw tension start to boil over a few times in that Bills game last week. Sauce Gardner got burned for a long touchdown, which is just uncharacteristic. And I just get the sense that the Jets are kind of resigned to their fate. And I also don't know if you want to be playing Miami coming off of a game that they just had, right? We'll talk about some teams that played below their level last week. Similar to the discussion about the Detroit Lions. Like I don't know if Miami's doing that again, right? I thought that was. In some ways, I thought that was Tua's worst game of the year. I know they won, but I thought he was just weirdly kind of locking in on receivers. The running game never got going. I think the Achane injury early on kind of threw them off a little bit as well. So I don't think you want to be catching the Dolphins, coming off of a 20-point game because the chances that happen again, even on the road, I think are pretty slim.
I do as well. So look for that bounce back. And yeah, I think maybe, that defense is unbelievable, but I think there's just a limit to that belief when the offense is so unable to hold up its end of the bargain. I think it wears on you after a while.
All right, interesting one in the NFC South, John. Saints-Falcons. This game is in Atlanta. You'll see some pick'ems out there. I know that's where it locked in the Circa contest. I'm seeing Falcons -1.5 at FanDuel. I'm seeing the Saints -1 at BetMGM. Falcons -1 at DraftKings. So kind of pick your number on this one. But ultimately, it's kind of a pick the winner type of game. I kind of swore off the Atlanta Falcons a few weeks ago. They have burned me so many times in my various gambling interests this season. Am I wrong to think that this is actually a decent spot for them? Like, am I just walking right into another trap?
I think with the Falcons being at home, I think that this is an okay spot for them. They've had the week, with changing over back to Desmond Ridder, and obviously we've banged on Desmond Ridder pretty hard over the course of the season, but now they have the extra week to kind of dial things back in for what the offense will look like with him back at the helm. I think when you look at the Saints, they're pretty banged up at key spots. If there are cars out there, I think that actually is a negative for the Saints. But if Winston's out there, you probably feel pretty good about the Falcons being able to force some turnovers. So either way, I'm in on the Falcons on this one, which, it obviously makes you feel gross. This is definitely a stay away as far as our circuit ticket is concerned, but I do side with the Falcons in this spot.
The injuries for New Orleans are what might make the difference for me. No Michael Thomas. Not that that's as big as it would have been 3 years ago, but still you're down a weapon there. Love A.T. Perry, by the way, in DFS this weekend. Get him fired up. On the defensive side of the ball, too, Marshawn Lattimore, he's kind of been in and out all year and seems like he's always banged up. And they suffered a high ankle sprain back in week 10. I mean, both these teams are coming off of a bye, and there's already been some indications earlier in the week that he might not be ready to go. And, you could argue that matters like literally the least against the Falcons compared to any other team, but still potentially a pretty huge loss for that Saints defense. And, you said it, like the quarterback position for New Orleans is just a disaster, right? Not that it's a whole lot better for Atlanta, but I weirdly feel, I feel like Jameis Winston is better for this current construction. Like a team that like they need the variance at this point. Like you'll live with the 2 interceptions if Jameis is throwing 3 touchdowns, because we've seen what this offense is with Derek Carr, right? Like there's been a few weeks where you start to think, all right, maybe they got it going, but it's the check down raid.
It's awful to watch. You get a guy like Chris Olave. I mean, the in-game split in that Vikings game where Olave through like the first half or up until Derek Carr got hurt, 0 targets. And then he still ended up having a useful fantasy day because Jameis Winston at least knows, hey, Chris Olave is pretty good. I'm going to throw it in his direction and see what happens. So, yeah, if it's Carr out there, it's just going to be very vanilla. I think it's going to play into the hands of the Falcons defense extremely favorably. So, I think Carr would make me feel much stronger about the Falcons in this spot. But even if it's Winston, I still feel good about Atlanta here.
Very prescient alert that I just got on my phone here, John. Ian Rappaport tweeting that Derek Carr was a full participant in practice today. He's out of concussion protocol.
Dirty birds.
So there we go. Burn it up, baby. All right, let's move on to Steelers-Bengals. Another game with a 1-point spread. You see mostly Steelers -1. You see some 1.5s out there. I believe that's where it's at FanDuel, but mostly Steelers -1. Low total, 34.5, as you'd expect. Now we get the Jake Browning experience for the Cincinnati Bengals. What do you expect to see here? I'm leaning Steelers grind out a very 2023 Steelers win.
Yeah, I don't think that Cincinnati can do what Cleveland did. Where they're dealing with the backup quarterback situation, that they have an offense that isn't going to be able to move the ball, but the defense is good enough to kind of help them find their way to a win and mess up the Steelers offense enough to get it done. I don't really take much away from Matt Canada being fired. I still think that this is a Steelers offense that's going to be in trouble the rest of the season, but I just don't think that the Bengals defense is quite good enough to win them this game or keep them in it the way that the Browns was. So I like the Steelers here. I hope I watch as little of this game as possible. I mean, the total, like you said, really looks like an earlier season Iowa Hawkeyes type of game. Now their totals are down in like the 26, 27 range, which is disgusting. Unbelievable. That's going to give me some interest on Friday. That's going to be an electric under to bet. But beyond that, the Steelers just go in and take care of business. They're going to win this game. I think that Jake Browning, he has no ability to push the ball down the field. There's going to be a lot of checkdowns. There's going to be a lot of short drives, 3 and outs for the Bengals. Eventually, one of Jalen Warren or Najee Harris will break off the big run, and that could be like the deciding factor in what ends up being like a 17-10 type of Steelers win.
So you watched Jake Browning really closely at Washington. Like, is there any chance that we're underestimating what he can be?
Well, one of the greatest calls of my life was that Washington was going to make the playoff in 2016, and they did. But that was the only year in which Jake Browning threw more than 20 touchdowns in any of his 4 years starting at Washington. He was like 16 touchdowns, 19 touchdowns, or 16 touchdowns, 43 touchdowns in that magical year, and then 19 and 17, something like that. So he just was a legend for 1 year and is maybe in the league just because of that 1 year, all those years ago. I was surprised to see that he was the backup there in Cincinnati, but yeah, I don't think that there's really, he was a great caretaker, I thought, last week for the Bengals, but they needed more than that if they were going to catch up against Baltimore. And I think in this spot, especially with a week for the Steelers defense to prepare and probably throw some crazy, kitchen sink type of stuff at him, I think he's in for a long Sunday.
Do you want to guess who is dead last in rush defense EPA on the year?
Is it the Cincinnati Bengals?
It's the Cincinnati Bengals. This defense has quietly slid over the last couple of weeks. So that to me it's not as much of a concern as going from Joe Burrow to Jake Browning. I mean, obviously that's a massive downgrade, especially for an offense. Well, for an offense that relies so much on timing and kind of the connection with Burrow and Chase and Higgins, like it's kind of out the window now. You can't build that over a course of a week. But the defense had shown signs of slippage before we had any idea that Joe Burrow was banged up. And Pittsburgh, we don't think of them as a good running team by any means. A lot of the advanced numbers would say they're actually solid. And I think, the more we see Jalen Warren, that's a big part of it. The touchdowns have not been there, but like yardage wise, yards per carry, yards per attempt, like they're doing all right in that respect. And I think this is one where you don't have to ask Kenny Pickett to go win the game for you. Right. And I think from going to playing Cleveland last week to now what's just not a good Cincinnati defense. They're probably average at best on the whole and just not very good against the run. I think this is a pretty good spot for Pittsburgh. Let's talk Jags-Texans. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, just as long as Kenny Pickett doesn't turn the ball over, I think the Steelers win this one. Rather, it'll be a game that it's a 7-point victory for the Steelers, but it doesn't look that close.
Yeah. I don't think they run away with this game by any means. I don't think the Steelers are capable of doing that, and the 34.5 total would back that up. Jags-Texans, man, the battle for the AFC South. I am nervous for this one. I'm more nervous than I am excited. Jags got to go on the road to Houston. They are given 1.5 to the Texans, so we're seeing some respect for the Jaguars. They, of course, got blown out by Houston in Jacksonville back in week 3. Jags seemingly got the ship turned in the right direction. They played, all in all, maybe their best game of the year last week against Tennessee. I think that was kind of the most that this offense has clicked for 4 quarters throughout the season, and basically had it sewn up by the end of the third. It got to the point, John, that we saw the official victory cigar from the Jags, where they ran Tank Bigsby 8 times in a row on a clock-killing drive in the fourth quarter.
That's a heck of a victory cigar. I think that it's more like a Dutch master than a Cubano, right? But point stands. But as it comes to digesting that game and dissecting what it actually means, I think they caught the Titans at the exact right time, and they had the exact right game plan dialed up. I know that there have been some kind of interesting splits when it comes to Calvin Ridley's good performances this year and how kind of tethered they, oddly enough, are to Zay Jones being out there on the field. So I don't know why they kind of have that correlation. But in this game, you got Derek Stingley on the other side. The Titans don't have anyone close to that. So I imagine Ridley comes back to earth this week, looks a little bit more like what we've seen. And I think the Texans are going to throw a good game plan at them defensively. I think Jacksonville is still kind of stuck in the mud offensively. Again, I just don't really take a ton from last week's game against the Titans. I could be wrong if that was the start of something, obviously, but I trust the Texans offense a little bit more in this spot. I like that the Texans are at home and getting some points here. So I side with the Texans, and I would not mind putting this on the card.
I don't know if I could do that to myself emotionally, but I reluctantly side with Houston as well. I think, both teams have had their kind of down games. Like, you forget, it wasn't that long ago that the Texans, completely fell flat and gave the Panthers their only win of the season. Right. And like, that was CJ Stroud has kind of taken off since then. And obviously he had played well before that game, but like, that's as much of a disaster to me as the Jags against the 49ers, especially when you consider the opponents. Like, I do think there's a pretty good chance that Jacksonville can win this game. Implied probability comes in at about 53%. But with this game being in Houston, I think both teams are going to struggle to run the ball. I know Houston's been better on the ground lately. I think that ends this week against that Jags defense, and the Jags have just not been a good running team all year. If it's Trevor Lawrence and CJ Stroud, and it's like, all right, first to 300 yards and 3 touchdowns, I think I favor Stroud in that scenario.
I would as well. And I still think that Trevor Lawrence is the better quarterback overall if we had to redraft all the quarterbacks. But Stroud is in a more favorable setup right now, I think, to have success than Lawrence, where Lawrence is playing on expert mode thanks to Press Taylor.
Yeah, don't say that man's name. I lean Houston here. I think this game, I mean, it's such a huge opportunity, right? I mean, Houston had no expectations coming into the year, and to have the opportunity now to really take control of the AFC South. They'd be tied in the standings, but Houston would have the firm tiebreaker with 2 wins over the Jags. It's hard not to back CJ Stroud in this offense right now. Buccaneers-Colts. Indy, 2.5-point favorites at home. Our total is 44. Colts have been kind to us this season, John. I feel like every time we've thrown them in the circa card, it's paid off. Most recently a couple of weeks ago in that just brutal game against New England that they ended up winning and covering. That was the first time all year that they have not scored at least 20 points. They were the only team in the league that had done that going into week 10. Extra week to prepare now for a Tampa Bay team that just played the 49ers. Like, teams always come out just like bruised and battered after playing San Francisco. And, I actually thought Tampa Bay hung in pretty well. Probably should have covered. I mean, they had like 4 drives in the fourth quarter that ended up falling short, and, good on the San Francisco defense. But, I thought Tampa Bay kind of showed up, and after a big first half from San Francisco, they weren't really able to move the ball all that much in the second half, and especially late. But I really like Indy here. Maybe not quite enough to throw them on the card, but I think this is a good spot for the Indy passing game, which, of course, has a ton of variance with Gardner Minshew. He's like the white Jameis in a lot of ways. So we have to acknowledge that. But again, after playing San Francisco, it's kind of a joke that, after playing them, you're beat up, but it's also a reality for Tampa Bay because Levante David, Jamel Dean, Carlton Davis, three of their, five best players on the defensive side of the ball might not play in this game.
Right. So that's definitely a problem for Tampa. But I think Indianapolis's defense is very bad. Mario was bringing up a good point in favor of Tampa Bay on the podcast earlier, pointing to the fact that, basically we value these quarterbacks about the same, right? Baker Mayfield and Gardner Minshew, who has the better weapons and who has the better matchup. And you would say Tampa Bay does. You got Mike Evans, you got Chris Godwin, and you have an Indianapolis defense that is allowing basically as many points as Indianapolis is scoring for their own part as well. So, obviously this Indy offense clicks along pretty nicely, but they give it right back to the opposing team. So I'm actually inclined to go with Tampa here. So if we're split, we'll probably leave this off the card, of course. But I would side with Tampa Bay in this spot.
See, I don't think either team is going to be able to run the ball, right? Like Indy struggled with that the last few weeks. You're running into a great run defense in Tampa Bay, and Tampa, we just, they, with all due respect to Rachaad White, they try every week. It very rarely works out well. And if it comes down to Baker Mayfield versus Gardner Minshew, you take Baker there?
I would. That two guys that are just you don't feel great about them being the quarterback of your team, but I think the two of them together could actually make for a pretty entertaining game here on Sunday. And what kind of otherwise, you wouldn't look at this game on the slate and be like, oh, actually, but you know what? Especially given what else we got, where we got the Pats and the Giants and the Panthers and Titans. Yeah, but Bucks Colts is priority watching over those. So it's going to be Jags Texans getting their own screen, and then I'm down for a little double box with Bucks Colts and Bengals Steelers.
All right, well, we'll agree to disagree on that one. Can we agree at least that we like the over on 44?
Oh, we absolutely do.
Yeah, that's a great number. Take the over on 44. That's the best bet for Bucks Colts. John, you mentioned it. We got to talk about it. We'll try to keep this one to like a minute. Patriots-Giants. My God, the total's 33.5. The Patriots are 3.5 point favorites on the road at the New York Giants. I want to stay far, far away from this one. I would love to say that it's a good spot for New England, but I don't know if we can confidently say that. We don't even know who's going to be under center.
Plus 3.5. I'm taking the team that was getting points in this one. Give me the G-men. Give me the G-men. I know last week it was probably more with just like weird divisional stuff and Washington finding a way to be the first team since 1984 to sack the opposing quarterback 9 times and lose by double digits. I'll take the Giants here. Maybe there's a little bit of a spark with Tommy DeVito. I would just I will say, and I said this on the pod with Mario, and I'm sure that you deal with it too, being a heavy Twitter user as well. I wish there was a way that we could mute Sopranos memes during Giants games.
It was played out a quarter into his first game.
Yeah. Like I was done with Sopranos memes in like 2019, and they still are out there. There's a lot of Thanksgiving PSAs about, don't put a frozen turkey in the deep fryer, stuff like that. But my PSA to our listeners is don't Sopranos meme when Tommy DeVito's on the screen.
All right. We got just a money idea here from our guy Benson. He says, hear me out on this. Let's move New England and New York and Carolina, Tennessee to Canton. Have them play on the same field at the same time in the Ultra Mega Hall of Fame game. I love this. I absolutely love this idea. 2 games going on in the same field? Yes.
Give me all of that. Yeah. How else? I mean, what better way to make those games watchable than having 44 men occupy, 100 yards of field? That's a beautiful idea. That's galaxy brain that we've come to expect from our guy Benson.
Powerlifter USA says, here's his parlay for the Thursday slate, by the way. Take the Lions money line, get alt lines on San Francisco and Dallas, take the Niners at 2.5, Dallas 3.5. I'm okay with that.
Yeah, that's the teaser. It's not the Benson pleaser, but it's the teaser.
No. Yeah, much different from the pleaser. Last thing I'll say on Pats Giants, John, is for so long you could kind of ride the Bill Belichick against a terrible, inexperienced quarterback narrative. Is that still alive in any way?
I don't think so. I really don't. The mystique's gone. I think with each passing week, we're seeing where Belichick definitely benefited from. I think he did an unbelievable job being the architect of that Patriots team for 20 years or so, but the roster is just not good anymore. So even if the scheme stuff was still as sharp with Bill, and it's not, I don't think that they have the Jimmies and Joes to overcome the X's and O's here. So I don't think that they really have that same mystique anymore.
All right, that brings us to Panthers-Titans, one of the participants in the Ultra Mega Hall of Fame game, which will be happening in Canton with both teams playing on the same field. Titans given 3.5 at home to the Carolina Panthers. 36.5 is our total. If there's a chance for the Panthers to get their second win of the year, is this one of those spots?
I'm saying it's a Will Levis bounce back game. I think the Titans get off the mat here. I think that the Panthers just really are that bad. I think that they put their stamp, they stake their claim to being the worst team in the NFL coming out of this game. So at 3.5, you hate trusting either of those teams with that. And, generally I'd be inclined to just take the points on either side of this one. But I think the Titans get this one done.
It's really hard to put stock in Carolina right now. And, we're like bouncing back and forth between play callers. They feel like they're kind of grasping at straws. Frank Reich has aged like 40 years since taking that job. It just feels like after every loss, you could picture him like walking up to David Tepper's office and just getting a tongue lashing. It just feels like that relationship is doomed. Like I don't know if he makes it through the year. I think firing a coach in this situation makes no sense, but I also think like out of frustration, like if they get housed in one of these games, it might just be time to pull the plug, from Tepper. And they're just a rudderless ship right now. And they have no ability to rip off big plays. That's the thing that stands out most to me when I watch Carolina. It's like they're not completely incompetent. Like you watch teams like the Giants for the most part, the Jets, even the Patriots. It's like some of these things that these teams are doing are like borderline laughable. And like I don't get that with Carolina. They're just like boring. They're slow. It's 3rd and 8, and they're throwing it 4 yards and getting tackled immediately. Like it almost feels like they're playing to lose. Like it's a really strange team to evaluate.
Yep. But I alluded to the Bryce Young throw heat map a couple weeks ago. It still remains the same. He cannot throw it over the middle. It's shortened to the boundary, and the corner just comes up and makes the play and stops Adam Thielen, and that's kind of it. And then Miles Sanders going for 2 yards, and we're punting. So that's just kind of what the Panthers' experience is. Yep. It's gross. Give me the Titans.
Yep. All right. I like it. Let's move on to Rams-Cardinals. Kind of a fun game. I guess technically a fun game in the NFC West. This game's in Arizona. The Cardinals are 1-point favorites at home, and our total is 44.5. I would be very wary of including this one on the circuit card, John, because I don't know if we're going to get any injury confirmation on Cooper Kupp or Puka Nacua before that initial deadline tonight.
Right. And it's said as a pick 'em over there. I will say, even if the Rams were at full strength and the line was a pick 'em still, I'm still on the Cardinals here. I think that they are a better team with Kyler Murray back at the helm, that they're out of the basement. If nothing else, are they a top 20 team? Still probably not. But I think that there's still enough there. You got James Conner back in the fold too. I do a radio spot out in Phoenix on Tuesdays. My guy, Bob Kemp, he noted that Kaiser White is out for the season. So that does hurt the Cardinals defense a bit, but even still, something's up with the Rams on offense. I know that they get Kyron Williams back, and fantasy people are excited about that, but I don't think that's actually an exciting development. I don't think that he's going to be able to do what he did to the Cardinals earlier this season. It's in Arizona. I like Arizona here.
Other than the Clayton Tune game, Arizona has hung around with just about everybody. I thought they played San Francisco about as well as they possibly could have, given the talent discrepancy, given the coaching discrepancy in that game early in the season. That one's always stuck with me. They absolutely should have won last week against Houston. I mean, the Texans were begging the Cardinals to win that game. And they had like 3 drives that felt like they were moving right down the field, got to like the 35-yard line, and then completely stalled out. I'm not really sold on this Rams team at all. I think they had somewhat of a fluky win last week against Seattle as well. Seattle should have been up 17-0 and probably put that game away before halftime. Rams season is on the line here, though, right? I mean, if they lose this one, any hope of grabbing that 7th spot in the NFC is probably out the window. But again, we're monitoring Kupp and we're monitoring Nacua. Kupp feels like a true 50-50. Nacua, we've gotten almost no information. McVay just said on Monday that he has a shoulder injury. We have no idea how severe it is. But if you're already feeling the Cardinals, man, and there's a chance that one or both of those guys are out, I'm certainly not going to talk you out of that.
And I think an anecdote that I think the listeners will like for a little backstage bit for us when we were making our card last week. It was down to the Cardinals and the Rams as our last pick. And I text you on Saturday morning, dude, I had a dream that the Cardinals got destroyed. We got to go with the Rams. It worked.
It sure did. I think did the Cardinals push in the circuit contest? I think it closed at 4.
Was it 5? Oh, but then the Texans still would have gotten it, right?
Well, yeah. Was it 24-19?
I think it was 5 points.
Yeah. Either way, we made the right call on the Rams.
Yes.
And when I was watching that game, Rams Seattle in the late window, and in my pick'em league, which I take very seriously with my college buddies, it's a high competition league, not a high money league, but there's a lot of trash talking going on. I thought I picked Seattle, and I was talking all kinds of trash when they're moving the ball down the field, and then somebody's like, "Dude, you picked the Rams," and I was like, "Oh my god, what am I doing? I'm an idiot." It ended up paying off. So thank you for your dream. And if you have any dreams between now and like 8 p.m. when we got to get these picks in, by all means, let me know. All right, let's talk Browns-Broncos as we move through the late window on Sunday. Really fun game. I enjoyed watching both of these teams for various reasons. Denver is turning things around, man. I mean, it looked like we were verging on like just total disaster, like somehow worse than last year early on. And, they have been a top 10 defense really since the Miami disaster, since week 6. I think they're like 7th in defensive DVOA. That stands out when you watch them. Offensively, you're still not blown away. Like they do feel like they've kind of recommitted to the running game, and that's been a lot more effective. You watch Russell Wilson, and it's like, all right, he'll hit one like crazy throw to Cortland Sutton at some point during the game. He'll have 1 or 2 to Judy, and then everything else is like these design screens, these tunnel screens, these dump offs to tight ends. Like it feels like they're being very, very careful with Russell Wilson.
That they are, but the results, it's hard to argue with them. Of late, I thought there was an impressive win over the Vikings this past weekend on Sunday night. Cleveland, the defense has to do it from here on. I think that DTR played well enough last weekend against the Steelers and everything, but I don't really trust him on the road in this spot against Denver. I think Denver's playing well enough on offense to where like they'll be able to get to like 17, maybe 20 points here. And I'm just dubious that the Browns are going to be able to answer offensively. And eventually the defense is going to run out of steam during this game, give up a score. So I like Denver to cover this one. I think it's going to be a hard fought game that probably isn't decided until the final minutes. That's kind of how both of these teams have been having their games results over the course of the season anyway. And it wouldn't surprise me if that continues here, but I do like the Broncos.
I'm really split on this one. I lean Denver because of the quarterback play, and good on DTR for getting the win last week against Pittsburgh. It wasn't impressive. He made some throws on that final field goal drive, which I felt like were a couple of his best plays of the entire afternoon, but he dropped back 44 times. I don't think that's sustainable, right? Like you need to be able to get the ground game going if you're Cleveland. And I don't know if that's going to happen. Like I thought Denver did a pretty good job against Minnesota. Obviously they did a great job against Kansas City a couple of weeks ago. Shut down the Bills to some degree, although the Bills shot themselves in the foot 4 times in that game. The thing that would hold me back on Denver is, their last 3 wins especially have been almost entirely due to timely forced turnovers. And you can say that's a skill for some teams. Other people would say it's a fluke, but they forced 12 turnovers over the last 3 games, and they've only committed 2 of their own. Like, can that continue, right? Like if you're not forcing 2, 3, 4 turnovers in a game, can Denver hang in?
With Dorian Thompson-Robinson on the other side, I say absolutely. Yeah. And if DTR didn't turn it over at all last week, I'm blanking on whether he did or not.
I think he did. He had 1.
Okay, he had 1. That could easily be 3 this week, frankly. So that maybe that will be a concern for Denver moving forward. But against a quarterback that I believe is as turnover prone as DTR is, especially if they ask him to drop back 30, 35 times, that I think they're begging for trouble there. And the combo of Jerome Ford and Kareem Hunt, I don't think it's enough to carry them and kind of offset the lack of quarterback play.
Yeah, if you tell me that Thompson Robinson attempts more than 30 passes in this game, I think Denver wins. I think that's not a good sign for Cleveland.
No,
All right.
not at all.
Yeah, well, we'll have to discuss how strongly we feel about that because you're making me feel a little bit better about the Broncos, and at 1.5, I don't mind that number. Chiefs Raiders, AFC West, Kansas City looking to get back on the right side of things. I thought for the second time this season, John, drops cost Kansas City a game. It was the case in Week 1 against Detroit. I don't think we can say that was the case when they lost to Denver, but now 2 of their 3 losses have been almost entirely pinned on drops. And it's not only, Marquez Valdes-Scantling. That's the one that's going to catch most of the attention. The Travis Kelce drop on 3rd down, when Kansas City really needed to move the ball, burn some clock. That was huge. And the Kelce fumble as well. Yeah, he's good for like 1 killer fumble a year. So hopefully he got that out of his system. I don't think, that's going to be a trend or anything, but I'm not anywhere close to panicking on KC. I want to be clear on that. They just won the Super Bowl. They get as much benefit of the doubt as anybody, but I feel bad for Mahomes. Like that was another thing I thought watching that game. It's like he's such a good sport about it. He's such a good guy. Like he's never going to have like the Brady Rodgers reactions, but
right.
He just looks lost. He's just like, you got to be kidding me, man. Like I'm giving you perfect throws in perfect situations. And this is not something that you fix week to week. I don't even know if it's something you could fix between now and the playoffs. Right. And I still think Kansas City probably wins 12, 13 games and they'll be the 1 of the 2 seed in the AFC. And it certainly helps that, Cincinnati is no longer a player and Buffalo may no longer be a player. Like they might very well make the Super Bowl, but I just these drop issues, man, it's really, really tough to account for because it just feels like it could rear its ugly head at any point. And obviously it did last week.
Yeah. And like, exactly. Like where is the fix exactly? Because I think that like Kelce's usage is already maxed out and maybe the returns on Kelce at this stage, people have for a couple of years, like been wondering where the cliff is with him because, he's just a few months younger than Rob Gronkowski. Like it's crazy that he's been as effective as he has for this long. And there's really no other legit options in this group. So with the drops, it's like Mahomes is putting the ball right on the money. That MVS one, a couple of Justin Watson instances, Sky Moore, him not developing, and Kadarius Toney, that trade being a flop, I think are 2 things that have set this offense back. So Mahomes, we're trying to figure out how I want to phrase this, but basically, since I've been home all week, I've been indulging in a lot of like ESPN, like First Take and The Herd and stuff. And it's just like I'm on vacation mentally, so I want to see what they all got to say. And there were some good stats being dropped about the lack of scoring for the Chiefs in the second half that didn't just exist last week, but it's been a long-standing trend of theirs, and that's a problem. So again, does it really matter against the Raiders? Unlikely in the long term. I am skeptical that this team can win the Super Bowl. But for this week, is it 8.5 or 9.5 at Circa?
I think it's 8.5.
At 8.5, I like them to do it this week. I think that the Raiders were obviously able to give the Dolphins a bit of a better game than a lot of people expected last weekend, and they returned home. But I think that the Chiefs will be able to get this done. But yeah, consider me concerned about this team's ability to repeat as champions.
3 straight games now without a second half touchdown for Kansas City. They're averaging under 6 second half points per game on the year. So this is not just a recent trend. I mean, it's something that's plagued them throughout the season. They've already had 5 games where they've scored 20 or fewer points. They only had 3 of those all last season. So there are real problems with this Kansas City offense. And at 8.5, it's probably a stay away for me. I think the Raiders are playing with a lot of confidence, especially after, shutting down the Miami offense last week, even in a loss. I think the defense played about as well as it could. But, I also think we have not even mentioned the Chiefs defense, which is the only reason that they were in that game against Philly, right? I mean, that was as impressive as the defense has played against the Eagles, especially in the first half. I mean, Jalen Hurts was sacked 5 or 6 times in the first half alone. That's a guy he's tough to bring down like twice over the course of a game, let alone 5 times in a half. So even if we're skeptical of the Kansas City offense, I think the Raiders are going to have a tough time, getting to like 17 or 20 in this game.
Right. Exactly. So that really is kind of like the difference maker here is just, how well Kansas City is playing on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah,
Benson likes the Raiders.
He's going Vegas. Okay. All right. Well, that
Okay.
doesn't make me feel great. He said he's in the top 15, by the way, John. I don't know if you caught that comment earlier. in the circuit contest. It's a stay away for me. I don't feel strongly about one side or the other, and I don't want to put faith in the Chiefs, right? I mean, even when the Chiefs have been rolling in the past, it feels like the Raiders have always shown up against the Chiefs. Like they always play weird games.
That's true. They absolutely do. Was it last year? Let's see. Yeah, last year I believe with the Week 18 game out in Vegas, like where the Chiefs toyed with them and they did the little like sugar huddle thing.
Yeah.
I don't think the Chiefs are having that much fun right now.
No, I don't think so. I don't think we see any of those antics. Bills-Eagles is our final game in the late window on Sunday. It weirdly feels like it's kind of lost some luster, mostly because of the Bills, but still a premier game, no question, and a huge spot for Buffalo. I mean, especially with the Eagles getting that win last week. They are in great shape in the NFC playoff picture, but Buffalo's got to make some hay, and they are very, very lucky, I think, that Joe Burrow went down, because that's going to help them, I think, find their way into the playoff field. How much stock do we put in Buffalo, bouncing back in some ways last week against the Jets?
Yeah, I've been going back and forth on that all week because it was a pretty good offensive performance by the Bills against one of the best defenses in football. But I think at the same time, the Jets were putting its own defense in such tough spots throughout the course of the game, all the short drives and everything, to where it's like, I mean, of course the dam was going to break eventually, and it did. So there's that to keep in mind. Like, how much do you take away from that offensive performance coming in here? But I think there is something to be said where like the pressure's on the Bills to get wins and put themselves back in the playoff picture. But I feel like it's not as pressure packed in this particular spot as it normally would be if they were, a team that was 7-4 coming into this game, something like that. I think they can play a little bit looser here. And I think that there's also something to be said for this Eagles defense, that if those drops were caught, that secondary was getting torched by not great receivers. And you have a very solid receiving core in Buffalo with Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis and Khalil Shakir starting to show up a little bit, and Dalton Kincaid playing pretty well of late. So I don't know, like this could be, I think more than anything, I'm inclined to say that this turns into a bit of a shootout. I like the over, even though it's pretty high. I think it's 48. As far as picking a side here, I keep going back and forth. I can't get comfortable enough with either side to put it on the card. Maybe you can make a better case for it. I think the Eagles win, but there's just too many ways in which I can see the Bills, being able to do it, especially with the Eagles kind of having to put everything that they had into that win on Monday night.
Yeah, I'm sympathetic to that argument. Technically a short week for Philly, but you're coming back home. I love the spot for the Philly offense. I think we could talk all we want about, Buffalo being disappointing in some ways and turning the ball over and firing their offensive coordinator. I've never really been of the belief that the offense has been the issue. I think the turnovers have been really the reason that they made that decision to fire Ken Dorsey. And I don't think that's on him. I think they needed a fall guy. And I think that kind of ballooned a narrative that wasn't really true, right? I think it was Mina Kimes who threw that tweet out last week saying, like, every single major advanced stat indicates that the Bills are still an elite offense. I'm worried about the defense. That to me is the bigger concern here. Like, we saw Philly struggle against Kansas City for 3 quarters. I think this is a much easier matchup, right? It's a Bills defense that's slipped, that's had some injuries. But if this turns into a shootout, I probably want to stay away. Like, I do think the Bills could score with Philly. It's just a matter of who could get more stops. And I trust the Eagles here. Like, I'm pretty firm on the Eagles winning this game, but at 3.5, I'm not going to push for it to be on the circuit card. Let's get to your team, John. They're playing on Sunday night. Ravens at the LA Chargers. Call me a sucker. I love Baltimore minus 3.5 on the road.
I do too. And I actually, unfortunately for us, this isn't like a super public pick. It's actually fairly split. Like 54% of the bets, or of the money, is on Baltimore here. So we're not looking at the 70-80+% that we are for some of those other picks or the Thursday games that we like as well. I know losing Mark Andrews stinks for the Ravens, and that could kind of lower their overall ceiling this season a little bit. But I think quietly, Odell Beckham playing pretty well of late. He looks a little bit kind of similar to how he used to look, and that's been a nice, refreshing development. Rashad Bateman has looked a little bit better of late. The defense is still very strong. They're going to the linebackers are going to have to come correct as far as stopping Austin Eckler as a pass catcher, because he's kind of like that chain mover in the passing game. Justin Herbert's been playing extremely well of late. I do think it helps that Baltimore is supposed to get Marlon Humphrey back. So his physicality against Keenan Allen, who's been a little bit dinged up in his own right, I think that certainly plays to Baltimore's advantage. There's no real home field advantage for the Chargers. I think that Baltimore goes in there and makes maybe not a statement, but I think that they're going to be able to cover this one. I think that this one should indeed be on the card.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a little bit of hesitancy on Baltimore just after the Mark Andrews injury, and that's big. It certainly impacts things, but I don't know that it impacts this game as much as it does, the AFC title game, right? I'm not super concerned about that. Ravens coming in on a long week as well. Barely a true road game as far as what the crowd is going to look like out there. And the Chargers to me just seem like a dead team walking. They've kind of been that way all year, but to lose that game in Green Bay the way they did. To see Justin Herbert react the way he did, like you almost never see that, right? You see no emotion from this guy, and he's shouting at the offensive lineman. He's despondent. Brandon Staley's getting after it with reporters. He's just, I don't know. Brandon Staley's not a good coach, man. And this defense without Joey Bosa, too. That's another thing. Already a shaky defense. You lose him. Austin Eckler looked awful last week. Yep. He did hit his over 55.5 yards that we handed out, but it didn't look great. It looked kind of more like a Jerome Bettis type of performance from Austin Eckler. And the Chargers have allowed over 300 yards rushing over the last 2 weeks to Detroit and Green Bay. Like Green Bay can't run the ball. Aaron Jones got hurt early in that game, and Green Bay still got over 100 rushing yards. I mean, I think Baltimore is going to tear them up. Yeah,
I mean, you don't want to have a bad run defense when you're playing against Baltimore. Like not only can Lamar Jackson hurt you in that sense, but Gus Bus has been ridiculous this season, especially in short yardage situations. And Keaton Mitchell, last week he didn't get enough touches to really totally tear it up. But this week he's still going to get those opportunities. I think we're looking at 7 or 8 Keaton Mitchell carries, and one of those could be down the sideline for big damage or a touchdown.
Achane Jr. Keaton Mitchell. Yeah, this could be the week for him finally. All right, let's get to the Monday night game. Bears-Vikings. Minnesota 3.5 point favorites. Got a lot of 3.5s on the board this week. I think that right now at DraftKings, there's 5 games that are sitting at 3.5. Obviously hard not to like what Minnesota's doing right now, even after the loss to Denver. Josh Dobbs has got to breathe new life into this team. They're still in pole position for that wild card spot in the NFC. But what do you say at 3.5 here? Is that a little too much?
I think it is. I think the Bears having Justin Fields back, kind of getting the fruits of the labor with their trade deadline move to get Montez Sweat. I think the defense looks a little bit better. They're able to turn Jared Goff over a lot last week, something that Goff has been, able to escape from the entirety of this season until last weekend. So you run into a quarterback that we kind of feel like is maybe not on borrowed time, but that like the other shoes got to drop with Dobbs at some point. And I don't think you can say that like he was completely at fault for them losing last weekend in Denver. But and maybe the Bears really aren't the team to be the one that make him look mortal once again. But more than a field goal, it's just a little bit tough to trust the Vikings. And it doesn't look like Justin Jefferson's going to be ready for this one from what I've seen. Again, we're recording a little bit earlier, so we don't know quite as much. We don't have the Thursday injury reports, but doesn't sound great for him being able to go. I like the Bears to keep this one close.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I think at 3.5, I lean Chicago. I still think Minnesota wins this game by a field goal. I don't think they're losing at home to the Bears. Justin Fields, I thought comported himself fairly well last week, especially as a runner. And obviously that's just something that Tyson Bagent wasn't really giving them. And, the first time these teams met, we didn't really get a representative sample, right? That was the Bagent game, his debut, and Kirk Cousins was still at quarterback for Minnesota. So I think you kind of throw that one out. I don't know that the other shoe has to drop with Dobbs. Like I'm not saying he's going to be, an MVP candidate or anything like that, but he's been doing this all year, right? Like I don't think this is some like crazy 2-game run for him. Like it's not a Linsanity situation. Like the ability to evade sacks, right? I mean, there were 3 or 4 times he should have been dead to rights. One of them he ended up throwing a touchdown against Denver. This is a bad Bears defense. It's a good run defense, but Minnesota, struggles to run the ball anyway. I don't think that really changes the game plan all that much. And Chicago dead last in passing EPA, in the NFL right now. So if there's a way to exploit them, it's through the air. And I think Dobbs, even without Justin Jefferson, like I think they can get this done.
Yeah, I mean, they do have Hawkinson and Addison. It's not like they're hurting for playmakers, but, Jefferson obviously puts them over the top in that sense. But Yeah, I think it's also pretty interesting the way that Fields ran last week. I mean, that was definitely the most active he's been as a runner all season. I don't know if he doesn't fully trust the thumb just yet, or if that was part of the game plan. But honestly, Justin Fields, if you guarantee me that he's going to be running 15 plus times, I think that makes the Bears even more dangerous.
All right, John, let's get to the parlays, the teaser, and the locks of the week. Let's get a little bit reckless here. What do you got for us?
Okay, so my parlay, this is just for Thursday. The Turkey Day parlay, give me Dallas minus 12.5. Give me Jake Ferguson first touchdown plus 750. So that those two things tethered together, that pays out 12-1.
Okay. I like it. We're going heavy on the Jake Ferguson props today. I'm going just with a classic 3-team money line parlay, John. We are taking the Baltimore Ravens, we're taking the Houston Texans, and we are taking the Pittsburgh Steelers. Those 3 money lines pay out plus 480 if you hit all 3. Teaser this week, we're going with a 6.5 pointer. We are teasing the Detroit Lions down to -1. They're at 7.5. We are teasing the Dallas Cowboys from 12 down to 5.5. We are teasing the San Francisco 49ers from 7 down to 0.5. So that gets you to plus 150 on the 6.5 pointer.
Okay, we like that a lot. I don't show me where it loses. I don't see it.
I think the potential for catastrophe here would be somehow Dallas just not showing up and Dak turning it over 3 times in the first half and they win that game by a field goal. But unfortunately there was not a 12-point teaser available. So Detroit -1, Dallas 5.5. San Francisco just has to win that game straight up against Seattle plus 150. Who is your best bet / lock of the week for week 12, John?
It would be the San Francisco 49ers -7. So that's just kind of standard. But if I were feeling so inclined, you can get them for plus 165 if you bet them -13.5. I don't know if anyone else is feeling that crazy, but it wouldn't completely shock me. And, I would toss on McCaffrey scoring 2 touchdowns in that one. I'm not technically proficient enough to get that dialed up right this second on the old parlay calculator. But I would also package those 2 up as the Niners -7 or -13.5, whichever you prefer. And then McCaffrey 2 or more touchdowns.
Okay. Quick news item to pass along. Just got an alert that Aaron Jones is officially out. Kind of figured that would be the case, but want to pass that along for the live listeners. John, my best bet, I'm going with your Ravens. I'm taking Baltimore -3.5. They're going on the road. I know it's a long trip, cross country, but extra time to prepare after playing on Thursday. And I think this Chargers team is dead, man. I think this could be it for Brandon Staley if this ends in a blowout. And frankly, I think it will. So I'm taking Baltimore -3.5. All right, thanks everybody for listening along live. Benson, especially our guy, always riding with us in these streams. We appreciate it. You can listen, of course, to the archive version on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Best of luck if you're betting NFL Week 12. If you're listening to this pod, we sure hope you are. We'll be back next week.